Welcome, everybody, to an all-new episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Thank you so much for joining me as I take my weekly look at everything going on in the world of combat sports. As you can hear, a little under the weather, battling something here, but still coming at you with a new episode, breaking down what we saw last weekend in the combat sports world, talking about the fights we're going to see this weekend, talking about some of the big headlines and news going on throughout MMA, boxing, and bare knuckle fighting as well, all here on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Coming up on today's episode, we are going to review UFC Fight Night between Strickland and Hernandez down there in H-Town last weekend for the UFC. We'll also preview the UFC Fight Night coming up this weekend in Mexico. You got Moreno fighting in that one in his home country, a bunch of other Mexican fighters involved in that as well. We'll also review the Mario Barrios fight against Ryan Garcia and the shock upset that came in that fight. We'll also talk about Tessa Shields defending her titles against Franchon Cruz de Zern in women's boxing. We're talking about the problems that the UFC is facing now with some of its fighters. We'll also talk about the rumored return of Floyd Mayweather is confirmed and who it's against. Well, I'd say you can't believe it, but we already talked about it a long time ago. We also have some fights for the BKFC that were announced and plenty of other things to touch on here on this episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Make sure you follow us on social media. On X, we are at Fighting Lines. On TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, it is at Fighting Lines Pod. Like, subscribe, comment, get involved with some of the clips we put up of the shows throughout the week. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're feeling about these fights. Send me any questions you have about things going on in combat sports and get my take on them, all that through social media. And whether you are listening or watching on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, share, all those things to get the show up there and get it out to more people so we can keep getting the community around Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano growing bigger and bigger each week. Thank you so much. Let's get right into it and talk about last week's fights down in H-Town for the UFC. All right, well, the UFC had a card last weekend down there in H-Town. UFC Fight Night, Strickland versus Hernandez. Finally starting to move the fight nights around a little bit again. We'll see some more of that again this weekend down there in Mexico. But last weekend, it was the middleweights headlining in between Strickland and Fluffy Hernandez. Strickland, the 34-year-old former middleweight champion, had lost 2 of his last 3. Both those to Dricus Du Plessis, of course, coming off a 6-month suspension for stuff he did outside the cage at another event. So now he was coming in there, trying to regain his form. He was highly ranked in this division, trying to keep that high ranking. While the up-and-comer Hernandez, Fluffy, the 32-year-old, was coming in on an 8-fight win streak. Strickland was going to want to bully this. He was going to keep it standing, going to try to pick his opponent apart. While Hernandez was the grappler, wanted to get it to the ground, wanted to get it to the mat, maybe even submit his opponent, but make him pay on his back. Well, it is Strickland who controls how this fight goes throughout, and he is the one who gets the win in this as well. So he gets a 3rd-round TKO victory. I thought Hernandez was going to win this. He was a big favorite at minus 270. Didn't get the picks out before the fights went on because we had some taping issues there, but I liked Hernandez. But I also said that it would not go the distance at plus 124, so that would have been a nice one there because the books were all shading it towards being a decision. There was a lot of decisions between these two guys. 6 of Hernandez's 8 wins on his win streak had not gone the distance, so I thought that it would end before it. And I thought it'd be Hernandez be the one who ended, but it is actually Strickland with a 3rd-round TKO, 2 minutes, 23 seconds into the round. Now, throughout much of this fight, Strickland was just picking Hernandez apart on the feet from the outside. Hernandez was stalking. He was coming forward, but just great technical boxing from Strickland. The 1-2s, just continuing to pummel his opponent left and right, especially that jab getting through, damaging Hernandez, cutting him up, bashing him up, giving them that little swelling here and there around the eyes and the nose. Hernandez really never sold out for the takedown for a guy who won the grappling. He didn't even really get his hands on Strickland until the 3rd round. He got a kind of clinch there, but even then didn't really sell out, didn't try to hold on it too long. Eventually got back to the striking, and that bit him in the ass because 2 minutes into that 3rd round, Strickland caught Hernandez with a nice knee to the body. That backed Hernandez up. He covered up. He was protecting himself against the cage. Strickland just kept attacking, coming at him now that he sensed blood in the water, just kept throwing shots left and right at Hernandez, who was not fighting back. Eventually, he went down. He unloaded him a little bit more on the mat, and then Herdine stepped in and ended it right there. But it was all started by that knee to the body, and after that, Hernandez was just hoping to survive and recover and never got a chance because Strickland was all over him and pummeled him until the fight was done. Now, while he pissed everybody off throughout the fight week with things he had said, whether it was at the press conference, whether it was at other parts, other interviews that he was doing, the racist, homophobic, misogynistic, just stupid things that we talked about last week. Well, he was actually kind of humble in the cage after the fight. He said that Hernandez was, a tough SOB. He gave him a lot of credit for his boxing, said he didn't expect Hernandez to be as good on the feet as he was. You brought him into the post-fight interview, tried to make it a joint thing there with Michael Bisping in the cage. He gave him a lot of credit, not just for his fighting as well, but saying that, Hernandez is a great man and he's the kind of man he wants to be with his family and the things he has going on outside of fighting. So a lot of credit given by Strickland to Hernandez, a lot of humility shown, a lot of graciousness towards his opponent. He got a performance of the night bonus for that one, a great bonus there for him. We'll talk about the money a little bit later on because I don't think he was too excited about that. I mean, he got the money, but there's plenty of more things that were going on with Strickland talking about money and pay, as many other fighters also weighed in. We'll talk about that coming up later on. But, he has to ruin it too, because in the middle of talking about how great a guy Hernandez is, he also threw out some racist stuff about Chimaev, calling him a Chechen whore. He also talked about how, Hernandez was finally fighting like a Mexican when they were standing and trading, and that he felt like he was half Mexican because of the way he was boxing and fighting. So even when the guy says something nice and gracious and humble, and you're like, wow, this is a different Sean Strickland, he has to go sprinkle in a little bit of racism and stupidity in there just to make you realize there's still him there and not completely still devoid of the idiotic stuff that comes out of his mouth. Now, Strickland called out Chimaev, the champion in this division, saying, if everyone wants to get back off the bench, he wants to fight with him. He thinks he deserves that. He put himself in a good spot with us now, keeping his ranking at number 3 with this win. Of course, Hernandez was right under him there, I think 5 before this fight. So if Hernandez had won the fight, he probably would have jumped up into those top 3, knocked Strickland out. But now Strickland sits there at number 3. Now, where does Strickland stand in this division, in this race for the title? Because now he is number 3 in this division. But he had just lost 2 or 3 before this to DDP, the former champion. Just one win over a guy ranked slightly below him, get him to jump over the guys ahead of him and fight for the title. I mean, obviously he has the bad blood against Chimaev. He talks a lot of crap about the guy, and I know Chimaev doesn't like him, but does that make it worth him jumping over the top of some other contenders that are in the mix? Well, number 1 in that division, the first challenger is DDP, the former champion who lost to Chimaev and lost to him convincingly. So I don't think you put him in a title shot right away. He's got to go fight somebody else. So you put him against Strickland again? I don't think so. You already beat him twice. Number 2 in that division is Imavov, who has won 5 fights in a row, and according to him, was already in the mix to fight Chimaev. He says the UFC tried to put it together in December and then again in February, but it wasn't able to happen because of Chimaev's foot injury that he was having surgery on and recovering from. And now, of course, he's in Ramadan, so you have to wait for him to get back into training after that and build up his strength again after fasting for the month. So some return, if he's ready to go, I think Imavov and Chimaev should be the matchup. But if something delays that for whatever reason, Imavov is definitely game to fight Strickland and make it a contender fight because he hates the guy. I talked on last episode about the terrible things Strickland was saying about Chimaev, but he's saying just as terrible things about Imavov. I mean, he talked about nobody wants those two to fight. Nobody wants to watch two non-Americans fight, and you can't put 2 terrorists, on the White House card, and just dumb things, of course, about these guys because they're Muslim, because of their religious faith. He's just knocking them and just saying idiotic things, beyond idiotic, because no one wants to watch 2 guys that aren't American fight. It's the UFC. It's a worldwide sport. And if you look at the top fights in the UFC all time, pay-per-view numbers, I mean, a bunch of them are Conor McGregor, who's not American, and a bunch of those include the Jose Aldo fight, who is a Brazilian, and Khabib Nurmagomedov, who, of course, is Dagestani. So that would be 2 non-Americans putting on the biggest pay-per-view cards the UFC had in the last decade. But nobody wants to watch 2 non-Americans? Dude, this isn't a local sport. This isn't a U.S. league. This is a worldwide combat sport. So if you're just looking at who deserves it, how this should go, I think Chimaev Imavov is the obvious matchup to make, especially if they've already tried to make it multiple times. Imavov's on a hot win streak and definitely deserves it against the champ. But if there's an issue, Chimaev can't go, if he needs some more time to heal, if the foot re-injures a little bit, throw Imavov and Strickland together. That wouldn't be bad. And if for whatever reason the UFC pulls what they love to do, which is grab the mouthiest guy and put him towards the top and skip guys who deserve it, while I hate it, as far as rankings and prestige and who really deserves it, because one win doesn't throw you right back in there, it wouldn't be a bad fight either. I think that could be a good matchup as well. So I think no matter what you do with those three, Imavov, Chimaev, Strickland, you really can't go wrong. But of course, by rankings, by who deserves it, and by what they've already apparently tried to make, should be Imavov and Chimaev next. The co-main event on this card was a battle at welterweight between Geoff Neal and Uros Medic. Medic, the 32-year-old, coming off back-to-back wins in the second half of last year, going against Neal, the 35-year-old, who had lost 3 of his last 4 over the last 3 years. Those were to some pretty stout competition there. Rachmanov, Machado Gary, and Praches. So he wasn't losing the scrubs, but he was on a slide here in the last couple fights that he had. I thought Medic was going to win this. I liked him, especially at plus money. I couldn't believe he was plus 180. This guy knocks guys out. And Neal is a solid fighter. He's a good gatekeeper, but I didn't think he was going to stop this guy. The book didn't think he was going the distance. Minus 800 for no. Under 1.5 rounds was minus 166, so not much value there either. Over 1.5 rounds was, I thought, something you could play at plus money, but doesn't get there. First round KO by Medic over Neal, 1 minute and 19 seconds into the fight. It was feeling out early between the two guys for about 40 seconds there. Then they both start throwing some kicks. Medic especially throwing some good body kicks there, trying to find their range with the punches. And then about 1 minute and 10 seconds into the fight, Medic lands a good right hook to Neal that kind of stuns him a little bit. Doesn't knock him down, doesn't make him backpedal, doesn't have a huge effect on him, but you can just see the subtle difference in Neal once that hook landed. Then they continue to trade, and 10 seconds later, Medic throws back-to-back left hooks with the second one dropping Neal outright, out cold, not even a chance for Medic to jump on top. Referee jumps in immediately. Fight is over. Medic with a great knockout once again. And talking about in the post-fight how he's going to be a problem for the division, how he will knock everyone out. He says, listen, this is how I fight. I go for heads. I go for, finishes. I may lose sometimes. I'm going to lose sometimes, but I'm going to come back just as strong, if not stronger, and knock out the next guy. He says that he wants his next fight to be in Serbia. Of course, he is from Serbia originally. UFC going there in the summer, apparently. He wants to go there. Might have some issues with that. Made an appeal to the president saying he's had some travel issues because of his immigration status, trying to get some help on that. We'll see if Dana can get some love from the White House and get that fixed. But if he can make it happen and have Medic fight in Serbia, his number one guy on his hit list is Leon Edwards. Now, Medic is number 12 in those latest rankings, and Edwards is number 8. So not a huge jump, not a bad fight to make, unless you're Rocky Edwards, because, of course, he's been losing lately, lost his last 3, got knocked out in his last fight. This does not seem like the guy he wants to come back in there against right now in his home country. But if he's game and the UFC puts it together and Medic gets his travel issues fixed, that can be an awesome fight to put on in Serbia. And Medic gets himself a performance bonus as well on this fight. So great knockout by him and a little extra money in the pocket afterwards. Also on this card was a featherweight battle between Dan Ige and Melquizael Costa. Ige, the 34-year-old from the U.S., lost his last fight in 3 of his last 4 and 4 of his last 6 and 8 of his last 13. So Ige is a tough SOB, but was not getting the wins for a while now. Going against Costa, 29-year-old from Brazil, who was 6-2 in the UFC, well-rounded, able to win anyway, but of course, most people know him from those nasty kicks, and they'll remember him from this one for that as well. He was a minus 215 favorite. I thought he'd win this fight. The books were expecting it to be a long fight. They thought it would go the distance. They had yes on that at minus 215, ending by points at minus 230, over 2.5 rounds at minus 270. So the only way you're going to be able to play it is Costa by points if you thought it was going to go that distance, but it does not get there as Costa beats Ige by first round TKO 4 minutes and 56 seconds into the fight. That's right. Just 4 seconds before the round is over, the ref gets in there and stops it. We'll talk about how I felt about that in just a second. But first, Ige was attacking early. He was trying to put Costa on his back foot, trying to get him in takedowns and go for clinches and hold him against the cage. And Costa was backing up, fighting the clinch, trying to keep it to the feet, trying to get his range. But Ige was doing a good job kind of clinching him up for the first half of that fight. Halfway through the round, Costa starts to get distance, starts to break that clinch and land some shots, especially some good kicks that we're used to seeing from him. Some good front kicks to the face against Ige with about 90 seconds left in the round. So he's starting to feel that range. And then almost as if it was a trigger for him, as if he's some kind of sleeper agent. And the second he heard the clapper for 10 seconds, boom, spinning back kick to the head of Dan Ige, puts him down on the mat. He jumps on top of him, lands a bunch of punches. Ige just covers up, does not try to fight back, and the ref stops it with 4 seconds left. Ige didn't like it, and I can understand why. I mean, I understand why the ref stepped in. They always say, fight back, fight back. He wasn't. He was just covering up, trying to survive till the end of the round. You're not supposed to give him more deference just because the round's supposed to be over, but, I mean, the guy had 4 seconds left. The punches weren't really getting through the guard too much. I get that he was in trouble, but you could have given him a minute in between rounds to try to recover, but instead, Dan Ige loses, fight is stopped, and Costa wins again. That is his 6th win in a row now. He is the first person as well to stop Dan Ige. Ige hadn't been stopped in a fight before, and this guy had fought some badass fighters in the UFC. It's some of the best in this division, and it's Costa who's the first one to finish him in a fight in the UFC. Afterwards, called out for a guy who's in the crowd, Diego Lopez. But, come on, no way that's going to happen. He's on a nice win streak right now, but he just got into the rankings of this division at number 13 after this fight. Diego Lopez is coming off a title fight. He's number 2 in these rankings. No way that fight's happening. If you want to look at something else to do, I mean, I know Josh Emmett has a fight coming up. Maybe you put them together afterwards. He's right now at number 11. You know, if he wins, especially, that could be an interesting fight to put him against Costa. Or maybe a Brian Ortega, who's at number 10 in that division right now. Or maybe even an Arnold Allen at number 7. That'd be a pretty big jump, but I think that'd be a good striking battle between those two guys after his win over Gene Silva. So Costa's setting his sights high. I think he's going to get something a little lower, but excited to see what is next for him as the Dalmatian continues to show some nasty kicks and get some finishes in the UFC. Now I'll finish with something we did not get in the heavyweight battle before that fight between Sergey Spivak and Ante Dalia. Dalia, the 35-year-old former PFL tournament winner, is coming off the loss to Waldo Cortez Acosta, where he thought he had the TKO. Then they started back up because it was an eye poke, and he gets dropped about a minute later, going against Spivak, the 31-year-old, who's coming off back-to-back losses to Cortez Acosta and Almeida last year. He lost 3 of his last 4. So was Spivak going to get back on the right track, or was it Dalia? Well, it goes a distance. I thought Dalia was going to get the win. This is the guy who's had a lot of hype. I mean, we had his teammate and Tom Aspinall said that, you know, maybe in a couple of fights he'd step aside and retire so that Dalia can go have his chance at the title. I mean, now Dalia's wondering if he's even going to stick in this organization for much longer, the way we've seen UFC release guys after some losses. Spivak gets the unanimous decision win, 29-28 on 2 cards, 30-27 on 1 card. Early on, these two guys were just moving around the center of the ring, both throwing some shots. Spivak seemed to get the better of the exchanges, just kind of blocking away the jabs by Dalia and then landing his own jab really well in 1-2 combinations. But the jab was doing most of the damage, just bashing up Dalia, making him bleed a little bit early on, you know, making his nose especially start to swell up through the end of the round there. And it was more the same early in the second round until a big exchange about halfway through that round where Dalia catches his range and starts to unload some big combos on Spivak, gets him up against the cage. Looks like Spivak is in trouble and Dalia is just taking over this fight. Looks like it could get close to the end of it. Spivak is in trouble. Spivak's covering up. The guy's barely even throwing back. He's against the cage. Just keep unloading on him and the fight could end. Instead, he clinches on him, lets him recover, lets him get back in this fight. Now he takes a round, so we're even going to the third, but bad move by Dalia, and it cost him. And Dalia had him in trouble. He had him shook. The guy was just covering up, barely throwing up against the cage. All he had to do was keep unloading on him, and it was going to be his fight. Instead, he clinches. He was tired. He lets Spivak recover, lets him get back in the mix. Then in the third round, it is Spivak doing the same thing he did in the first, controlling things from the outside. Eventually, he gets the takedown with 3 minutes left in the fight. Holds Dalia down for a bunch of that round. Now he gets back up later on, tries to throw some strikes, but it's too late. Spivak takes the third in my book, 29-28 Spivak. That's how 2 of the judges saw it as well. And he moves on to get the win here and get back on track in this heavyweight division that's really up for anybody's grabs here. In the post-fight, Spivak talked about how rough 2025 was for him, that not only did he have those losses, but also lost his father at the same time. So he's going through a lot of emotional and mental baggage. But now he's hoping to turn things around in 2026. And it looks good in this fight. I mean, this is a guy who's a big grappler, who, you know, is a submission guy, likes to take guys down, be on top on the mat and just control them. He looked good standing. He looked a lot faster than he usually does. I think that was a great win for him, a good showcase for him. He moves up to number 6 in this division now. Now, right ahead of him, when you're looking at next opponents, is Cortez Acosta, a number 5, but Cortez Acosta just beat him last year, so probably too early to rematch them right now. So you put him up against Kunyev, who's right below him, but use him to get another win and maybe build him up. And both these guys coming off some good wins. That could be an interesting matchup to see who is better and who can get into this top 5. Otherwise, there are guys below him that he can, fight as well in Tybura or Lewis, but he beat both those guys recently as well. So I think Kunyev is the best matchup for him to make because I don't think he's ready to jump into that top 5 yet. But with another win, very well could be in this heavyweight division that's just an absolute mess. Also on the main card, he had a nice win and finish by Jacoby Smith over Josiah Harrell by first round TKO. He got himself a performance of the night bonus as well. Both these guys were throwing early, throwing some takedowns on each other as well. We had a suplex at one point, but late in the round, Harrell takes Smith down, and immediately Smith kind of throws the legs up, escapes from the back, gets on top, and ends up turning the position and beating up Harrell until the ref gets in there and stops the fight, and he gets the victory. So great job by him to not only escape and get out from being under his opponent after the takedown, but to get right into offensive position and rain down some shots until he finished his opponent, knocked him out cold, and the ref stopped it. Now, it was mostly decision wins on the rest of the card. There was a submission in one of the female fights. Not too much to write home about overall, but a decent card at the top. And now we'll get another fight night this week down in Mexico. Even less to talk about, though, when we get to the picks coming up next here on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. All right, now, we talked last week about TKO and Zuffa Boxing signing Conor Benn for $15 million for one fight. And what that might do to people who already fight for them. You see the money that they're throwing out for this one guy for one fight who isn't even a champion in boxing. I predicted that it could have some effects. It could have some negative issues arise from the guys you were under contract with already. And lo and behold, a lot of fighters speaking out about that Conor Benn deal right now that Zuffa Boxing gave him and not too happy with their pay in the UFC. Now, this is something we've talked about for a long time, ever since they got that Paramount deal where they're making over $1 billion a year. I said that you got to give the fighters some more money for multiple reasons. First of all, they're the ones bringing in the money. The product is what's getting you that TV deal. If the fight's stink and nobody was watching the UFC, nobody was watching the fights, then Paramount would not be paying $7.7 billion over 7 years for it. So just like with the athletes in the 4 major sports, they deserve a big piece of the pie because they are the reason it's there. They are the reason that money is in the pockets of TKO Group. Also, I mentioned how raising the money that you get for these fighters could help you out in a lot of different ways. Number one, guys showing up and fighting hurt. If they're making a lot more per fight, that can sustain them a little bit longer instead of them having to show up for the next one, even if they haven't been able to train like you just had earlier this year. Or it can also help keep guys from throwing fights. Because if you're just giving the lower card guys 10 and 10 to show and win, then if someone's offering them 50 to maybe throw the fight one time, why wouldn't they? They're getting offered 100. You're damn sure they're going to do it. That's 10 times what they're making. So if you give them some kind of basic income or just bigger pay per fight, maybe some health care on the side and not just when they're fighting, then it's going to keep your product a lot better too, because guys are going to make sure they're at top form when they get in that cage and put on the best performances for you to help further this TV deal. Now, we already heard before the calendar kicked off for the UFC some rumblings of stuff with this, but long before the Conor Benn signing, because you had Justin Gaethje before that interim lightweight title fight talking about how he wasn't making any more money. Now, Dana White said it was because his manager didn't answer the call that they made, and his manager agreed, but he said that they were going to give him a worse deal, that it wasn't going to be worth it, and they'd much rather wait, fight what they're fighting on, and then do a new deal after he became champ, which he did. So we'll see if that changes at all, and if his tune changes the next time we see him at a press conference for the UFC. But some guys who have also stepped up and talked about this and called out the UFC for their practices with how they're paying their fighters. Well, first of all, it's the guy we mentioned before who just can't keep his mouth shut about anything. And it often pains me when he actually says something. I'm like, yeah, that's a good point, and I agree with him. And then I have to go look at myself in the mirror and say, wait a second, did I just agree with Sean Strickland? Something wrong with me? But in this case, he's right. He called out the UFC's pay structure before he fought against Hernandez, calling it, quote, predatory. So that's a big accusation to make. That's just not saying, hey, they don't pay me enough. He's saying it's predatory. And he talked about how the UFC doesn't give its fighters anywhere near the percentage that you get in these other major sports that I mentioned before. NBA, NHL, MLB, NFL, they're getting like 45 to 70% of what the league is making, depending on the league. But usually at least around 50. It's usually an even split at least. The UFC, according to some of the lawsuits that we've seen, they're paying their fighters about 13 to 20% of what they're making on TV deals and ticket sales and all that. So an 80-20 split at best, when you got 50-50, at least in these other leagues, these other pro sports, that's insane. And that's going to piss off a lot of people. Now, Strickland also said he doesn't care about the bonuses. Of course, he got one, and I'm sure he enjoyed the check. But when you have the bonuses, it's only going to a couple fighters. It's nice that you bump that up and some guys get a bigger paycheck that night. But if you're not getting one of those and you're still lower on the card, you're still not making a good amount. You're still not making a livable wage. You're putting your body and your health and your future on the line, and you're making what, maybe 20 grand if you don't get a performance night bonus and you win. And if you are a guy who's lower on that card and you lose, making 10 grand, you got to pay your coaches, your travel expenses, go do your own health checks and stuff. It's crazy. Now, one thing he said that I don't agree with is Strickland said he thinks that the American talent pool will dry up if they don't start raising how much they're paying fighters, because he thinks that fighters from other countries are more likely to take it, and U.S. fighters are going to stand up and say that's not okay. But that's not the case. You're always going to find guys who will take that money, even if it's crappy, because it might be better off than what they're doing. So I don't think it's going to drive the talent pool at all, but I think, obviously, the better you pay these guys, the better they're going to perform for you, and the less likely they are to screw things up and show up hurt or just throw a fight because someone else is giving them more. But he wasn't the only one to talk about this. Another guy I don't like often agreeing with, but who made a good point, is Sugar Sean O'Malley, who came out after that Conor Benn signing and ripped that as well. He says, crazy how you put so much work in the UFC, build this name, create this character, be a star. I'm not making effing $15 million a fight. He also said he doesn't even know who Conor Benn is. He's like, I got twice the social media following of this guy. Who the hell is he that he's making all this money when I've been here for years with the UFC and I'm not? You also had Demetrius Mighty Mounts Johnson, the former UFC champion, say on his podcast that it's a flex play signing Conor Benn. He gets that because obviously Dana hates Eddie Hearn, and stealing his guy is a big get for him. But he also says you have to think how many times a UFC fighter has been paid like that for a fight. So you have to use your hands to count it, because it's probably not more than 5. And that's probably with pay-per-view points and bonuses for that, or with a long-term deal where you're getting that over the course of multiple fights. That you're not getting that in the UFC for one fight for just about anybody. And if you are, it was very few. Maybe Brock Lesnar, maybe a Conor, and maybe a John Jones. Not much else. And of course, Demetrius Johnson, don't forget, was one of the most dominant champions in the UFC when they weren't giving his division enough love. And he left because of the pay. When he was a champion, he still left the UFC, went over to ONE and tried to make more money and be a bigger show, because the UFC just wasn't giving him enough, because they didn't care as much about the smaller divisions at that time. So he knows about when the pay stinks and getting out of Dodge. Also, you heard from Michael Venom Page this week as well, saying he isn't happy with the pay and how Zuffa threw big money at Conor Benn in boxing. He said he wasn't really excited about the Paramount deal to start because people were asking about him, like, hey, this is going to be great. You guys are going to make more money. He's like, let's see. Because he wasn't so sure that they're going to trickle it down to the fighters, and we've seen they haven't necessarily. He says he doesn't like how, you see Dana value guys outside the organization more than ones who have been there and who have helped build him up. The UFC is what made Dana White. He made the UFC, and the UFC made him. Without each other, he's not the guy he is. He's not the multi-millionaire he is, making tons of money running it still for TKO. So he's like, hey, listen, this is your baby. This is what got you here. And now you're throwing big money over at these boxers that aren't even part of this, that didn't help build anything. What the hell? What are we, chopped liver? He said Ben's good. Obviously, him being in the UK, he knows Conor Benn. He thinks he's exciting, but he's not the best in his division in his sport. And you're still giving him $15 million to fight for one fight. So these guys are not happy, and they're making it known. TKO needs to get the fighter pay up now with this deal, especially if you're going to be throwing money at your other organization in Zuffa Boxing to try to steal some big names and make it a bigger deal. Now, of course, Benn's a one-time thing. So is Crawford. So is Canelo. And of course, Dana comes out and says, hey, listen, it's not us paying it. It's the Saudis. It's Sella, who we'll talk about more later as well. But that's not going to make the fighters okay. That's not going to say, okay, well, as long as it's not you guys and it's your partner's paying it. They're going to say, well, get them involved and get me some money over here then. They did this once and it hasn't gone well. If they keep doing it with other guys, it's going to go even worse. You're going to get a mini revolt here. Now, of course, the UFC is a Goliath. They are a monopoly, basically, in MMA. You have the PFL, you have other organizations, but for the most part, if you want to fight the best of the best, you want the prestige, you want sometimes even the better money, it's the UFC. The PFL and Bellator have thrown big checks before, but we'll have to see if they still can right now. They're in a fight for their lives this last year, the PFL. Bellator got bought out. Strikeforce used to throw big money, they're gone. Affliction did that, they're out. It's really the UFC if you want the pinnacle of MMA right now for a lot of these guys. So the only way you're really going to get it, it's nice when one of you speaks up or a couple of you speak up, but the UFC doesn't care about that. They're getting sued by tons of ex-fighters. It hasn't made them change their ways. The only way you're going to get is by collective action, by you working together as a big group, not just a couple. But who knows if the fighters will ever do that. Speaking of the UFC, TKO and Sella, they all could be losing some money coming up if this case that might be coming up against them goes in the wrong way. And that's because Frank Warren and Queensberry Promotions sent letters before action for breach of contract this week to Sella, which is the Saudi Arabia's sports event company, and the TKO Group, of course, owns UFC and Zuffa Boxing. Now, the letters sent out by Warren and his promotion say that Queensberry entered into exclusive deal with Sella in September of 2023 to offer its fight expertise and help Sella out as they put on that Tyson Fury-Francis Ngannou fight. And that they also had a contract with the TKO Group and gave it access to Queensberry's online database. Then, of course, in 2025, those two formed a partnership in March. And then a couple months later, formed Zuffa Boxing that is now competing with Queensberry and these other promotions. Now, Warren and his company are saying that both these had a breach contract, that they did this deal behind his back, even though they had deals with his company, with his promotion, and formed their partnership and kind of screwed him over. And he's saying he lost about $1 billion in income that would have come if those guys lived up to their contracts that they had with Queensberry Promotions. So this is letters before action. It's not a lawsuit yet, but we'll see if this ends up in court and if Frank Warren and Queensberry come after TKO and Sella. That'd be a big money lawsuit. As I said, he's asking for $1 billion. I don't know if they'll pay him off just to go away, but either way, if he's asking for $1 billion, he's not selling for a lot less. It's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars to make this go away if they don't just fight it outright in court. We'll see how that one shakes out. Boxing was in action with a couple of fights last weekend as well. Of course, the main one was a title fight between Ryan Garcia and Mario Barrios out there in Vegas for Barrios' WBC welterweight title. Garcia, the 27-year-old, was 24-2 coming into that fight. Had beat Devin Haney, but of course, that was overthrown by a no contest after he tested positive for a banned substance. Was out for a year, came back for Rolly Romero last May, lost that fight. Now going against Barrios, a 30-year-old who was 29-2-2 coming into this fight and had his last two fights go down as draws. Last one was, of course, against Manny Pacquiao. I thought that was a BS decision, and even though he was a slow starter and didn't really turn on like he should have, I thought he still beat Pacquiao. But either way, he still held on to that WBC welterweight belt and put up against Garcia, who was a guy with a lot of talent, but really seemed like he had some issues mentally. Had a lot of stuff going on after that Haney fight. People were watching him kind of unravel right before them, but we were anxious to see if he could put it back together here and be one of the best in this division. I thought Barrios was a big underdog at plus 205 and was a juicy underdog because even though he had those draws, I thought that he could win this fight. I thought he was better against Pacquiao. Well, at least this time he does not go to a third straight draw, but he loses this fight as Ryan Garcia gets the win over Barrios by unanimous decision 119-108, 120-107, and 118-109. That's right. On those scorecards, he run either 12, 11, or 10 rounds of the 12-round fight. It was a domination by Garcia. I thought the fight would go the distance either way. I had it minus 112 to go the distance, and he gets the unanimous decision win. And he looked like a different fighter, honestly. He looked even better than when he beat Haney. Garcia is now the WBC welterweight champion, and he came out right away attacking Barrios. He wasn't afraid of him. Known for his left hand, but in the first 30 seconds, actually drops Barrios with a right. So he came out right away, caught the champ with a punch he didn't even think was coming, put him down to the mat for 10-8 rounds. Throughout the fight, Garcia just was quicker. He was beating Barrios with a punch all the time, and his punches had more power behind them. He controlled this fight from start to finish. He deserved this title, and he won this title. I mean, this is maybe the best he's ever looked. This is always a guy with a lot of talent, but you always wondered if he was putting in the work, if he was really taking it seriously. Had a lot of BS going on outside of the ring, loved to play the head games, but then seemed to have his own mental breakdown at times, so you never knew what was going on with this guy. Seems like he got that sorted out. Seemed like going back to his dad for his trainer, maybe got him back in check and put him in a different spot here mentally, got him to focus, got him to train hard and be at his best. And this is a dangerous Ryan Garcia. Now on the other side, Barrios, this is a bad performance by him. Not to take anything away from Garcia, but Barrios just does not look right now. As we said, he had 2 straight draws. I thought he was better than Pacquiao, but just didn't turn it on enough. This one, he never got it going to begin with. So we'll have to see what's next for him now that he's lost his title. But Ryan Garcia has some great things in front of him for sure if he can keep it together, if he can keep himself focused. And we'll see what might be next for him. Now, a guy we mentioned previously, Conor Benn, saying he wants him. He wants Garcia. But of course, we know he just signed with Zuffa Boxing for big money. And Dana White and Oscar De La Hoya, they don't get along. That's the problem with boxing. It's all about promoters a lot of times. The fighters want to get it going, but if the promoters don't want to make the fight, it just doesn't happen too often. Now, Garcia said that this was going to be his last fight under Golden Boy, that he's a free agent. So if that's the case, maybe the UFC throws some more money at Garcia and has him and Ben go at it. Or someone else makes it happen who's more amenable to fighting Ben and dealing with Zuffa. But right now, as it stands, if he is part of Golden Boy, I can almost guarantee De La Hoya is not putting him against Zuffa Boxing. So who else is out there for him? Well, if you look at the other champions in this division, the IBF champ is Lewis Crocker. Probably not a big enough name for Garcia to want that fight. My favorites for him to fight are 2 of the other champs in this division. WBO champ Devin Haney. As we said, Garcia beat Haney, overturned because of a positive test for banned substances. I think that would be a great fight. Put them back together. See who is really the best right now. Is it Garcia in his power? Is it Haney in his speed? There's bad blood. There's history. I think that'd be a good one to settle the score between these two. You also have the WBA champ, who is Raleigh Romero, who, of course, beat Garcia in his last fight. So there is history there again. It can, again, unify some titles. I think both those are the best options to make for him. But then, of course, another name that's been floated around is junior welterweight champ Shakur Stevenson, who's coming off that exciting fight over Teofimo Lopez to win this belt. Now, he had just moved up to that 140-pound division. Can he move up to 147 and not have it cost him? There's been talk of maybe going to do a catch weight. I think that's what Shakur would prefer. But Garcia's dad seems to say, hey, like, if you want to fight the best and be the best, come fight us at our weight class. He doesn't want Ryan to drop some weight, it seems like. It seems like he wants him to stay at this division. And if Shakur wants to fight him, he wants him to come up to his weight class. We'll see if he's game to do that. That could be a big jump going from 135 to 140, then up to 147, all in a matter of a year. You don't want to do that too quickly. You want to make sure you're right for the weight class before you go make that jump and cost yourself in the end. Now, you're supposed to have 2 other title fights on this card, but unfortunately, the co-main got pulled. Both guys made weight, but there was an issue the next day, right before the fight, that some kind of illness or weight cut issue or putting the weight back on issue that had that one pulled, unfortunately. So still end up with another title fight, though, as the elevated co-main, where Gary Antoine Russell put his belt on the line against Andy Hirioka for the WBA super middleweight title. And Russell wins this fight 117-110, 116-111 on 2 judges' scorecards. Hirioka had travel issues getting there. Didn't get there till much closer to the fight than he wanted. Missed the press conference in the middle of the week. So he had just about 2 days to adjust before getting this fight after a 20-hour flight. And early on, it seemed like that cost him. It seemed like Russell was a bigger starter, faster starter, did a great job bringing it to his opponent. Seemed a little rusty at first after that long layoff and that long flight, but eventually he does come alive in the middle rounds. In fact, the 6th round, he really started tearing Russell apart. 7th round, it looks like Kiriako might have taken the fight over. Looks like Russell was in trouble. He rebounds later on. They kind of alternate the last couple of rounds there towards the end of the fight, and it's just enough for Russell to get this win. I think it could have been a much tighter score, maybe a 115, 112. I think they gave Russell a little bit extra benefit of the doubt here in Vegas, but still he holds on to that title. A good fight for both these guys. We'll figure out who he defends it against next in the super welterweight division. All right, some other news, announcements, and fights being talked about before we get out of here on this episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. First up, last episode I talked about Floyd Mayweather coming back to pro boxing. Of course, he's going to fight that Tyson fight, Mike Tyson exhibition in a couple months. But then after that, later this year, he'll return to pro boxing. Talked about the motives, why I think it's happening. What I didn't talk about was the opponent. I'm kicking myself for this because I mentioned this guy, and I just don't know why I didn't put together because obviously this is something we talked about months ago. At the end of last year, there was rumors about this happening. And for some reason, I didn't put 2 and 2 together getting the show ready that it was going to be Manny Pacquiao. That's right. September 19th in Vegas, possibly at the Sphere, we will get a rematch of Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. Now, I could go into a bunch of detail about why I hate this fight, about both these guys coming back and doing a rematch for a fight that stunk the first time. But instead of wasting my breath, I'll let this guy talk about it. A potential rematch in 2026 between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. Did anybody ask for this? I sure as hell didn't. We saw this fight, and it was a historic fight. 4.6 million pay-per-view buys, $72 million live gate, both records for boxing and combat sports. These guys fought 10 years ago, and I haven't heard anybody ask for it again since they fought. Once we got it and it was a complete disappointment, I don't think anybody won in seconds, except maybe these two as a money grab. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, is it better than putting boxers in their 40s and 50s against Jake Paul and other guys? Sure. Is it better than having Jake Paul fight Tank Davis, who he outweighs by 60 to 80 pounds and is 8 inches taller than and has 9 inches of reach on? Yeah. Does that mean it's a good idea? No. I don't want it. Do you? That's right. I couldn't have said it better myself because, of course, I did say it months ago. No one wants this fight. This is going to be terrible. It's completely a money grab. Obviously, Floyd needs it. Sure, Pacquiao needs it too, whether it's to go do good in the Philippines or just to have it because he's given so much money of his way to others before. But still, you're not getting my money for that, that's for sure. Going back to action last weekend in boxing, as I said, we had a women's title fight going on as well. You had Claressa Shields defending her heavyweight unified titles against Franchon Cruz de Zurin. Of course, these two fought a decade ago in their pro debuts. And the undefeated, unbeaten, undisputed Claressa Shields won that fight. So Cruz de Zurin was looking to get revenge on that one, but never really had a chance. Cruz de Zurin, who is close to 40, almost 8 years older than Shields, actually came out hot early. Tried right away going at her opponent, chase her against the ring, putting her against the ropes, try to bully her a little bit, make it a tough fight for her. Did a little bit of that in the beginning of the last round as well, the 10th round. But other than that, it was just Shields hitting her left, right. Every time Cruz de Zurin hit her with 2 or 3 shots, she hit her with 6 to 8 shots. She was just way faster, way better, way more precise, and she just picks her opponent apart and sweeps the scorecards 100 to 90 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Of course, she was a huge favorite, minus 2,000, so it wasn't even worth trying to get involved betting it. And she lives up to the hype, lives up to the big line there, and is still the unified, undisputed heavyweight champion in the women's division. Another interesting fight on the card was Danielle Perkins, a former challenger to, of course, Claressa Shields. Shields beating her. Well, she took it out on somebody else. Perkins with a nasty 6-round KO, huge punch against Che Kiniali earlier on that card. It was a hell of a punch. You don't get too many knockouts or too many huge punches like that in women's boxing. She gets the TKO victory off of it, but it could have been a KO. She just knocked her clean down to the mat, and that fight was over the second she went down. Good job by her. She actually celebrated afterwards with Claressa Shields. No animosity between these two, even though they were former opponents. Could they be future opponents again? I mean, Perkins is a title holder in the division right below Claressa Shields. She's fought in that heavyweight division before and is still ranked in that division pretty high. So it's always tough to find an opponent for Claressa Shields. I mean, obviously, this is one that she gets along with afterwards. Would they do it again, though? Could they put another fight together? We'll see. What is next for Claressa Shields, the GOAT of women's boxing right now? Now, changing over to some fights that are going to be coming up later on. Of course, we announced a bunch of fights for the PFL last week on the show, talking about filling out those main cards for the fight cards they have coming up in March. Well, they announced a new card coming up in April 16th, over in Ireland, going back over the pond after having a couple fights here in the U.S., going to Belfast, headlined by Paul Hughes against J.J. Wilson. Of course, Hughes is going to be fighting in his home city, Belfast, for the second time in a year, coming off that loss, fighting for the title against Nurmagomedov. Now going against J.J. Wilson, 11-2 from New Zealand, had won in his first round of the 2025 lightweight tournament for the PFL, but then had to pull out because of an injury. Then came back later in the year to fight Archie Colgan and lost that fight. So now he's looking to rebound and get back on the winning ways. He's going to have a tough time doing it against Hughes in front of a bunch of drunk Irish fans there in Belfast. It could be a long night for him. The BKFC has also announced a bunch of fights recently. So let's touch on those quickly before we get out of here. Of course, their next fight card is in Newcastle on March 14th when they have the UK heavyweight title on the line with Mick Terrell fighting for that one, returning for the BKFC. Of course, if he gets that belt, it might be short-lived because you had Dave Feldman talk on the Bare Knuckle Show with Brian Socha this week about how they are discussing getting rid of all the other belts. All these European titles, the UK titles. It's nice to have them for those local fans to get excited about a title. But he says, you know what? If we're going to be a top flight combat sports promotion, then you need just one world champion. So we'll see what they do and how they phase those out. But Mick Terrell is going to fight for that UK heavyweight title on that card. After, in the next week, you have the BKFC going back to Hollywood, Florida. BKFC 87 on March 20th will be down in the Sunshine State, and it will be headlined by Kai Stewart putting his belt on the line against Nico Gaffey. Gaffey fighting over in the UK and Spain and Europe overall has shown some great things. He is a dangerous fighter with some serious power and will be a tough test for Kai Stewart. But King Kai has dispatched every test before him, so we'll see if he can do it once again and retain that featherweight title. Also on that card, there's been a bunch of fights announced, but one that caught my eye is Leonardo Perdomo fighting once again against Coulter. Who? Yeah. Another situation where Leonardo Perdomo fighting down in Florida for the BKFC and no title on the line. How many fights does this guy have to win before we put him up for the strap? Seriously. I know Orlovsky wants to take some time off and he's the new champion, but what are we doing? Keep putting this guy against guys he's just going to roll right through. The only ones who are going to give him any sort of fight and any sort of pushback are the top of that division, and we're not putting him against it. Come on, let's get this going. Another card that was also announced in April. I mean, if you go to the BKFC, they have so many cards coming up between March, April, and May as well. It's going to be a busy couple months for everybody involved with that organization. But one fight card we found out about was Clearwater, April 24th. BKFC Fight Night down there, the third one they've done down there in Clearwater, the Tampa area. Now, the co-main event is going to be Royal Ryan Reber versus Joshua Oxendine. Interesting fight there. But the one that I really like is the main event. Jared Warren, Captain Deadpool, going to be coming back to fight in front of his hometown fans against Conor the Crook Cook, who's coming over with that UK title. This is going to be an interesting matchup. Cook, of course, just won that UK Light Heavyweight Championship in his last fight. Now, this is something that Jared Warren is familiar with because when Christie held that title over in the UK, he went over the pond, fought him there, and beat him. Didn't come back with the title because of the delineation of the champions at that point. Didn't want to bring that belt over to this organization. It wasn't on the line. But he has fought the UK champion and beat him before. Can he do it again on his home turf? This time with Conor the Crook Cook? We will see. That should be a great battle with some serious punches thrown between those guys for sure. All right. When we come back on the next episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano, I'll recap UFC Fight Night Moreno versus Kavanaugh down there in Mexico. We'll also preview UFC 326, the BMF belt on the line between Holloway and Oliveira. And we'll talk about the latest news and notes around combat sports, whether it's boxing, MMA, BKFC. We'll be there for it all here on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Make sure you follow us on social media at Fighting Lines on X, at Fighting Lines Pod on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you are partaking in the show, whether it is YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Like, subscribe, share, comment, do whatever you got to do to get more people involved with the show. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you next episode of Fighting Lions with Brian Ciano.